Hi everyone. So I had recently made this time lapse of the planet Jupiter. This is over a couple of hours, and I had also taken this picture of Jupiter from my driveway just outside of Calgary, Alberta, and I want to show you how you too can do this. So let's get started. First thing you're going to do is you're going to have to download two programs. The first one is AutoStackert. This one over here, AutoStackert 3, completely free, and it's probably one of the best programs available for stacking and selecting planetary images. The second program you're going to need is this one over here, which is Registax 6. So I use Registax for sharpening. There is another program available as well that does both of these things, but I've always used AutoStackert and Registax, and I've gotten great results with them. So that's what I prefer to use. So once you've downloaded those two programs, we can proceed to the next step. Let's close Registax for now. So in AutoStackert, what we're going to do is the video files that you have taken off whatever your target is, whether it's Jupiter or Saturn or the moon, you can, I prefer to take them in SER format, .ser, whatever program you're using to capture the data from your camera. Whether it's just a regular video you've taken on your camera or you are using a program like SharpCap or Fire Capture to get the images from your planetary or astro camera. What you would do is just grab and just drag and drop the files into AutoStackert, and then AutoStackert automatically opens the file so you can see a color image. If you are not seeing a color image, it's likely because if you go to color in AutoStackert, you might not have auto detect checked. So usually auto detect does a great job, but you can manually select the bare pattern as well. So usually leave it on auto detect unless you have a particular reason to change it. So what we're going to do now is you can play through this video just by dragging this bar at the top of the program. And the first thing you want to make sure for planetary imaging like Jupiter is that you have planets selected in AutoStackert. And sometimes having dynamic background can help, but in other cases I've found that it's problematic. As you can see, if I select dynamic background, my recording of Jupiter is jumping all over the place. So just disable dynamic background and leave threshold at 0. That works pretty well. So as you can see now, the planet is very well stabilized, even though it was moving around in my frame when I was imaging it, because my tracking was not perfect at the time. So Laplace value, you can leave this at the default of 6. Make sure you have local selected. And I've experimented extensively with having double stack on and off. The results were very, very close, but I did find that having this on for me at least produced slightly better results, but it had slightly higher chances of getting artifacts. But in this case, it's fine to just leave it checked. So that's what I did for my image. Now on the right side, you have to determine what percentage of the frames you want stacked. We'll determine that after, so leave it at whatever it is right now. I'll just empty that out. It's best to have the frame normalized, the stack normalized. What that means is that if some of your images in the video were brighter than others, it'll equalize the brightness of all of those images before creating the final result. So it's good to have that normalized at 70% and leave it like that. You don't need sharpening right now because we're going to do that after, so just leave that unchecked. Rgb Align, if you're using a color camera, definitely have that checked. If you are using a monochrome camera, then just uncheck that. But I'm using a color camera, so I'll have that checked. Leave that checked. That's save in folder, so it'll create a separate folder. And in the free field, you can put whatever you need to remember when the image was taken and what scope you were using, all sorts of details like that. So in this case, I wasn't using an ADC. I was imaging at f12.5, and this was 2022 October 7. So that's what I put in there. So once you've got AutoStackert selected, set up like this, what we're going to do is we'll just go over to the video. In my case, I have multiple videos to stack, so I'm just going to drag and drop all those videos in there. But if you just have one video, you can proceed by clicking Analyze. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all of these videos that I had. So all of the SIR files. The first one I forgot to switch over to SIR, so I'm just using an AVI file, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to drag and drop all of those files into AutoStacker, and it automatically loaded them all. And as you can see, it says 1 of 11. So it's just showing the first video, but there are 11 files loaded here, and the settings are all the same that I just showed you. So what I'm going to do is hit Analyze. Okay, AutoStacker has finished analyzing the files. That, yeah, it didn't take long. It took maybe 15 seconds for me. So what we're going to do now is take a look at this graph. So this is the quality graph. At the very left here, these are the higher quality frames, and it's been sorted by quality. So over here, you can see at the 50% mark is when the quality drops down below 50%. This graph is going to look different depending on the quality of your data, but all of these frames have been sorted based on quality. So if I look here in this window, I can see that the first frame here is the highest quality frame, but as I drag this thing forward, I can see the frames changing, and I can notice the quality degrading as I move forward. At the very end over here, I can see this is the lowest quality frame, and it's been cut off because Jupiter was at the edge of my field of view at the time. So that's the worst quality frame, and the first one is the best. Now, how do you determine what percentage of frames to stack? It's going to depend on a lot of factors, but a good rule of thumb is that looking at this graph, you want to select whatever percentage of frames is above 50%. So in this particular video, I can see that about half of the frames, this is the 50% line, about half of the frames were above the 50% threshold. So what I would do ideally is just click here in this frame percentage to stack, just select that, and just hold down Control CTRL on Windows, and I'm assuming Command on Mac, and then just click at this level. So it has automatically filled in 50%, or actually you can just type in 50% here as well, and then just click somewhere else. So now it's going to stack the best 50%. But since it's not just one video that I'm stacking 11 different videos. Some of them will be worse in terms of quality. The graph might look different, where only 20% of the frames are above the quality threshold that I want. So what I'm actually going to end up doing here is I'm just going to stack, if the seeing was pretty good, you can stack 50% of your frames. If the seeing was bad and you have a lot of frames, you can stack, the top 10%. So based on some experimentation I previously did on some of these frames, I'm going to end up actually stacking 16% of them. There's not much of a scientific reason for why I selected 16. It's how I was naming folders and all that. But what I'd recommend for you is just look at this graph, and if your quality is pretty good, if it looks like this, stack your top 50%. If this green line is down here and only 10% of your frames are above this 50% line, this blue 50% line, then select 10%. So just determine what percentage stack based on what this line looks like and where it ends up hitting this 50% line, and that's what you select. In this case, ideally, if it was just one video, I would have selected 50%, but I'm stacking multiple videos and some of them were of worse quality, so I'm just selecting something around here. And now what we're going to do, once we've selected what percentage of frames we want to stack, and you can also actually select multiple. So you can select 5% of frames to stack, and then you can also select 20% and 50%. So what it'll do is it'll make 3 separate stacks for you, or 3 separate folders. And then the first folder, it'll select the 5%, second folder 20%, and third folder 50% of the files will be stacked. So you can experiment with multiple different options this way as well. So I'm just going to delete that because I've already experimented. So what we're going to do now is move over to this window, and I'm just going to reset this back. Okay, so what we're going to do is put some align points around Jupiter. So you select the size of the align points over here. Now the thing is, you don't want, you can just get it to place the grid automatically as well. Just click place AP grid, and as you can see, AutoStacker has automatically put some align points on here, but I'm just going to clear that because on Jupiter it's better to manually place align points, and you don't want too small. You don't want the points to be too small. For example, if I select 24, it's just aligning very, very tiny features in this case. You don't want that, so clear it out. And if you're selecting features that are too big, yeah, that's a little bit too big. So you just want a decent size so that you have maybe 20 or 30 align points. If your data is of really high quality, like the seeing was very, very good, you can put more and smaller align points. If your data was of poor quality, then just put fewer, larger align points. So my data was okay, but I mean the seeing was not phenomenal. So I'm gonna take a middle approach and just put some fairly large align points that'll cover the planet's disk. I'm going to put a couple around the great red spot and put a couple, just have them overlapping a little bit like what I've got. And you can also put different sizes of align points to align to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just select 200 as the size afterwards, and I'm just going to put a couple of really large align points around here as well, just overlapping with everything else, so I don't have any corners of the planet that are not covered by any align point. And if you have a little moon sticking out, I'm going to increase the brightness here just to show you. Right over here, you can see that's the moon Io. So what I can do is I can put one align point on that as well. So you can also zoom in. That'll make it easier for you. So just zoom in, put an align point in the center of Io. And if you put an align point and you want to change it, just right click and that'll delete that align point. See, I put it in the wrong place. Just right click to delete that align point and just get it roughly in the center somewhere. Okay, that's close enough. You can zoom in to make it easier, but I'm recording at the same time, so I'm not too precise. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to reset the brightness here to 1x. There we go. And get the zoom back to 100%. Okay. Or actually smaller is fine. So I'm going to put a few more align points here because I'd accidentally deleted some of them. Okay, just make sure that the entire planet is covered here. You don't want any large sections of the planet that aren't inside any of these boxes, because then you're likely going to end up with some stacking artifacts later. And you also don't want to put these align points too close to the edge of the planet, because again, then you might end up with some artifacts. So as long as the entire planet is inside some portion of these boxes, then that is fine. So we've got some pretty decent coverage now. And just any fairly high contrast features, it's best to put an align point there. But that's all looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now that I've got align points around the planet is I'm going to switch back to this other window, and I'm just going to hit the stack button. And then as soon as it's done stacking, I'll be right back. Okay guys, so AutoStacker has finished stacking all of the images now. So once that happens, it shows 100% in this window over here. So I'm just going to go back to the folder where all of these images were stored. And since I had selected to stack 16% of the frames, you can see that it has created a folder here called AutoStacker_P16. So if I double click on that folder, you can see all these different files in here. I'm just going to right click and group the files by type. I don't need these auto-stackered files anymore, so I'm just going to delete them. So these TIFF files, that is, it has output, that's the ones I want. You can also output the files as PNG if you want, but I just use raw TIFF files to save. Now, if I open one of these images, you see a blurry image of Jupiter, and the other ones are also blurry, but as you can see, as it's going forward, you can kind of see a little time lapse. In some of them, I had rotated the camera for some testing. So you can see that Jupiter is rotated a little bit in some of these images. So what we're going to do is we're going to sharpen these images. And for that, we use auto-stackered. So I'm just going to bring up auto-stackered. And we can close, we're going to close Registacks, and we're going to close auto-stackered. And we have Registacks open now. So I'm just going to drag and drop one of these images into Registacks for sharpening first. And the way you would sharpen it is you select the options on the left here. What I usually do is I select dyadic as the wavelet scheme and wavelet filter as Gaussian. So just select these two options. They've always worked well for me. And so these wavelet sliders at the top ones sharpen the smallest details, but they can also increase noise faster. And if you want to reset any of these sliders once you made some change, just right click on that and it'll reset it to the default value. So first one, not making a difference. There's not a lot of detail at that level. Second one, which will sharpen larger detail, you can start to see it making some taking some effect, but again, it's mainly sharpening the noise. We don't want that. We want it to sharpen detail. So I reset that by right clicking. Try number 3. Now we're starting to see sharpening at the correct level. So I'm zoomed in a lot here, but that's fine. So you can start to see it sharpening some detail, but if we push it too far, then it ends up making the image noisier, and we don't want that. I'm just going to reset that. Try slider number 4. And yep, that's nicely sharpening things up, but the problem is now it's sharpening detail that is too large, so the image just looks kind of fake and cartoonish. So I think the best option here is using slider number 3 to sharpen it as far as I can without introducing any noise into the image. And then you can also use number 4 a little bit if you need to make some changes. But in our case, I think number 3 here is fine. Yeah, that's about as far as it goes. And I'm zoomed in a lot. I don't need to do that, so I'm just going to zoom out. I think that's about a good zoom level that we're going to be looking at. So I think slider number 3 around here, that's pretty good, around 75. Now what I can do is, since I have to apply this exact scheme to multiple images, to all of these 11 images, and I don't want to save them all individually, here's one method you can use to apply this setting to all of those frames at once. You can use a tool called the macro batch option. But the first thing I'm going to do before I can use that is I have to save this scheme. So I'll just click Save Scheme and just type in a name, let's say Jupiter. So I'm just going to save what I just did to this, which is change the Registack slider here to 75. I'll save that as a scheme. Now I'll just load that scheme. And once I load it, it shows up under, or actually load scheme. There we go. Now it should show up technically. So that scheme has been applied. Okay. So yeah, I've saved that scheme, and then I've loaded that scheme, and it has been applied to this image. So once you've made any changes, you can hit this Do All button as well, just to apply the changes to the entire image and see what it looks like. Now you can see IO over here looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is open up, go to Tools at the top left, click Show Macro Batch Window. So we're going to load all of the files that we want to sharpen at once. We click Add Files. And over here in the folder where the files were, AP_16, or sorry, autostacker_P16, I don't see anything in there. That's because the TIFF files that I had saved aren't in any of these lists. So what we're going to do is we're just going to click here in the file name. And I'm going to hold down the shift and type in this quotation mark. I'm going to hold down shift and type in 8, which puts one of those stars and then another quotation mark. So this means regardless of what kind of file is saved in that folder, it'll show all of them. Now when I hit enter, it shows all of the files that are stored in that folder regardless of their file type. So AutoStacker doesn't seem to by default allow you to open up multiple TIFF files like that, or any TIFF files using this batch processing window. But if you use this trick, the quotation mark star quotation mark in the file name, it lets you pull them all up at once. So just select all the files, click open, and the files are all listed down here now. Now what you want to do is, since we were using that one particular wavelet, you want to go to the wavelet tab, hit save, and hit this this forward facing arrow, and that brings it into the batch window. So it'll apply that wavelet, that sharpening level, to all of the files that we have loaded down here. And we want to save all of those files as well. So you can select the file type, PNG, which is easier to open, or TIFF. I use TIFF, so I'll use that. And if you don't want it to override the files that you have loaded with the new sharpened ones, you can put something in this empty box in front of wavelet save. I'll just put an X and then hit this arrow so it goes into the queue. So it's going to apply that sharpened wavelet, that sharpening, to the files we have loaded all at once, and then it'll save those with an X in the file name so it doesn't override the files that you had selected. And then all you have to do is come down here to this section and hit the run button. So as soon as it's done applying those, I'll be right back. Okay, Registax has now finished applying this sharpening level to all of the files that we had. And if we go over to the folder, in my case I had decided to just override all those previous files with the sharpened ones, but if you didn't select that option or put an X in the file name, it's going to create a second set of files, and then you can just put them into a new folder. Now in my case, these are all of the sharpened files that Registax has saved, and as you can see, they're all sharpened and looking much better than the initial files that I had put in there. So in some of the cases, like this one here, you can see that I had turned the camera a little bit while doing some testing. And some of the files that are bad, you can just delete them. You don't have to keep all of them. So this one, for example, is overexposed a little bit because I was doing some testing. This one too, I would just delete them. But as you can see now, you've got the beginnings of a time lapse. So to show you the actual time lapse, I'm just going to use the files I had saved on another day that didn't have that camera rotation issue going on. That is the files over here. So this were actually from right after that previous set of files. So as you can see, I'm just hitting the forward button to go to the next picture right now. And as I'm flipping through the pictures, it looks like a time lapse. But to make an actual time lapse from these pictures, what I can do is use a third piece of software called PIPP. This is the one here. So PIPP, very, very good free piece of software for making time lapses and converting files from one format to another. It's absolutely amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all of these files that I want to use for a time lapse, and I just drag and drop them into PIPP. Just say OK. As you can see, it has brought up this window which shows me what the first frame looks like out of all of the frames that I have loaded here. And what we're going to do here to make a time lapse from all of these still images is that we're not going to use any of these options here, the ones that says optimize options for. That ends up giving you trouble a lot of the time, so we'll just do it manually. So the first section, the first tab you see here is image files. That's showing that we have 23 frames loaded. And by default, join mode is selected. Leave it at that. We want join mode. Go to input options, and everything over here can be left at as default. If you have color images and the result ends up being black and white, just manually select color from over here. But usually it does a good job of auto detecting that, so we don't need to change anything on this page. Next one is processing options, and everything over here can be left as is as well. Next is quality, all good. Animation options, this is where you have to make a change. Now right at the bottom here where it says repeat all frames in sequence, I usually just set that to 4 or 5, just so it repeats the entire sequence. If your entire time lapse is 3 seconds long, well, that's going to be a very short video, so just set this to 4 or 5 so it repeats a few times, so your viewers have a chance to actually see the time lapse that you have made. Next tab is output options, and leave everything as default, except you probably want to change this to the last one, MPEG-4 lossy compression, and make sure this is set as 10. And we're going to go down here and uncheck this option because we want to manually set the frame rate. Now this is going to depend on the number of frames you have. If you have 1,000 frames, you probably want 60 or 30 frames per second. If you only have 20 frames, you want something slower. So I'm just going to set my frame rate as 6 frames per second. That sounds like a pretty smooth video, well, for a planetary animation. So you can set your frame rate over here to whatever you want. And then the next tab is just where we get started. So I'll just hit start processing. And right over here, PIPP has created a folder with our time lapse. Now if I double click on that to open, this is what it came up with. Yeah, it looks pretty smooth to me. It's a nice long time lapse. And as you can see, PIPP is repeating that a few times. So you can see the moon Io and its shadow going over the surface of Jupiter. And you can see some detail in the cloud bands. You can see the great red spot. So that's all there is to it. And now you can post this video on YouTube, or you can send it to your friends or family over email, or whatever method you prefer. Now PIPP is not only useful for making time lapse of the planets and the moon and the sun, it's also very useful for making time lapse of things during the daytime, like the clouds moving over a mountain, or whatever situation you have in mind. It can make a time lapse using the same method. You just drag and drop files into this, and if you needed them stabilized, it has options for that as well. And otherwise, you just put in the same options that I had selected, select your frame rate, and output your time lapse. So that's all there is to it. Thanks for tuning in.